Good afternoon. My name is Bruce Gunther. I'm the Chief Curator, and I'm here to welcome you to the first in this spring's Critical Voices series, a series that began in 2005 with, in honor of Clement Greenberg, one of America's great art critics, and a critic who, through his engagement with ideas and art and artists, set the stage for the critical development of a dialogue about the ideas of art in America in the modern and postmodern era. It was our intention with this series to bring to Portland a series of artists who are shaping the current dialogue, as well as the curators, art historians, and fellow travelers who respond to that dialogue and that activity of the artists. And it is my pleasure today to introduce Jesper, an artist from Denmark, who lives and works in New York, who represented Denmark in the Venice Biennale this past year, has been working over a decade in the public realm in the area of video, film, performance, and ideas. Trained as a painter at the Royal Danish Academy of Art, he moved into the world very rapidly to become an auteur, a cinema artist who works inside the world that we occupy of place and person and action. Our dialogue today, I hope, will open up the ideas that not only shape his practice, but the current work that's on view upstairs, This Nameless Spectacle, and his practice and politics. We are going to start by showing an early film from 2002. It's 4 minutes. We're going to break the conversation periodically with segments from various films that he has made that open up the evolution of his process. I'd like to thank the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation for their continuing support of the Contemporary Art Program here at the Portland Art Museum, and for their specific support of the Critical Voices lecture series. Jennifer Steinkamp will be joining us, as it says, in May for the next program in this ongoing series. A California-based artist whose ideas and attitudes about the medium is very different than Mr. Just, and I think it will make an interesting comparison for those of you who choose to participate in both. Again, welcome, and now we'll start with a piece from 2002, No Man is an Island. And we can watch it here. That's great. Jesper, this was an early film and part of a series of handheld camera works that you did with using several characters, but the young man repeats himself in all of these, I think. And don't start nodding. I don't want this to be a monologue. Although it would work. Could you tell us a little bit about the construct of those films in which an older man and a younger man are set in these situations? This film, I think, is about 4 minutes. It was done while you were still at the Academy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this was an early film. I have never really been trained in making film, and this is one of the films that I shot myself, obviously. So it's, it's very rough and handheld. And the whole idea was not so much to do a project that looked like film. It was more a happening that I wanted to document, but then create some kind of narrative within it, but it's very vague. It's right that before that I've been studying painting and drawing, and then I slowly moved into photography, and that then eventually became video, and then later real film. But I was interested in coming back to the male relationship. I was interested in social conventions of place, and so I wanted to just try and have male characters in a public space having some kind of emotional outburst that normally wouldn't be acceptable. Not that you can't cry in public, but it's generally seen as weak if you don't contain your emotions, especially if you're a man. So the very idea was just to see what happens. There's this place in Copenhagen. This place is not important necessarily where it is, and that's something that goes through all the films, that I try to keep it open. I never really dwell on exactly where it is because I want it to be kind of have this openness. But it's a public square where there's mainly immigrants in Copenhagen, and it's also an old where the square was made kind of for labor workers. There's all these sculptures of different kind of crafts. So
I was going to say, and without knowing that, your eye picks up on those clues, the sculptures of children, the innocence of that place, the multicultural, multi-ethnic people who assemble around this activity, which seems to begin as a solitary gesture, and a man dancing, and then one's aware of the young man crying, and then the collecting of people as the film activity pulls people to them. Was it shot in one sort of long dance, or did he dance and dance again? And it feels obviously cut a little bit.
Yeah, we cheated a lot. So we did, also editing.
Well, I mean, that's art. We always cheat.
It's in a way done like you would make a music video where you play the music because it's slow, but you play it in 400% speed. So he dances really fast when we shoot it, so it looked really awkward, and that's why also it could have been seen as a provocation to the kids playing there. But I mean, of course, they know everything about media, so they just thought it was for MTV, and so they. I mean, we had no idea what would happen, and this is a place that has been portrayed as violent, and there's been riots between police and the kids there, and I mean, not those children, but
right.
Older kids, and so I had no idea what to expect. But the beautiful thing is that these kids just started dancing along. I mean, I didn't talk to them at all before till after, and so this was just something that this guy's emotion, dance, kind of just made them dance along.
Well, I was going to say,
and then of course I have where I say cheated. the kind of build-up where there's no one and then suddenly they are there, and
Yeah.
I mean that's constructed.
Yeah, because people were occupying the square at various times. I was going to say, this is not something you should try at home unless you've signed up for medical care and you're ready to accept the consequences. I would never do this. But the notion of
dancing?
that kind of,
No?
well, particularly on an uneven surface, up and down stairs. I like the notion of the ambiguity of the relationship of the two things in the film, and the notion of how you selected the place. Your work strikes me always as a bit like the book Without Marx or Jesus. There is in your work this notion of between and betwixt, self-consciously chosen a square that is a site that has been in social conflict, but there's none of that evident except to a local in the film, and yet it's a buried fact inside of your work, just as your thoughts about the relationship of the older man dancing, the younger man crying. Are they one and the same? Are they two stages of man? The flowers on the ground. Your attitude about what is found and what is recorded, I think from the very beginning is an interesting notion. Do you want to sort of open up that, specifically with this film, because we'll return to it with some of the things that are on view later.
Well, I usually find a place and then put some kind of action on display maybe, and I very rarely add anything or take anything away. It's always the place that creates the story and the conventions of place, and so if you have a square, everyone knows how one should behave at a square. You probably shouldn't dance around by yourself. So that's already there. There's something that's kind of pointing in some direction, and for instance, the flowers, I didn't add that. There's a church right there. So, but of course, I just then used it in some way without maybe dwelling of why. Yeah. But it adds something. Maybe I don't even know what it adds, but it was an element that was there, and then I will use it, and then it will add. Of course, it's not that we film everything that we see, but at this kind of early stage, it was everything that was found. The one thing I did before was the same guy, the older guy, banging a suitcase against the National Bank, and I was hoping that someone would come out, but no one came out. But he was there for 10 minutes doing this. So that was all these conventions, playing and kind of provoking social conventions, or playing with those. And in terms of the relationship between the men, the reason why I was interested in that was mainly to also play on power structures, but also play on again, something you can't really place or put in a box, and if you talk cinema, it's so important that everyone gets it. Everything is in the right box, and no one has. Yeah. Let's not talk mainstream cinema. So that's something we also come.
Well, we'll come to, because it raises several of those markers for the viewer, because we're not told what to think. We only begin to understand it through our own frame of reference and our own associations. The flowers on the ground, memorials to the dead in America tend to accumulate piles of flowers, as they do in Europe, and yet they're also somehow joyously colored and bouquets. Without seeing the church, you think something has happened here that is empowering, and to have the man dancing to this kind of romantic orchestration of this, and someone crying. It's a very interesting notion about what prompts tears, what prompts dance, and the two together is at the touching moment. And many of the films in this series of films had that same kind of quality, whether it was the truck driver and the young man and the truck becoming another scene. It's a further complication of this idea of the ambiguity of place and context of social relations. What was the response to this series? Does the response now vary from the response when you began to film these and show them?
Well, I think first of all, if you're an artist that get kind of known for one thing, it's very hard to get rid of that. So that is still, maybe my work is still seen as being these cross-generational male relationships. Later I have done different kind of relationships, but it's kind of still, so I don't know if it's changed, but because this still seems to be what people remember, those early works.
Yeah.
And then, but I think as the work has become more cinematic, it's also read in a different kind of context, and so I mean I can't really say what the response.
I think the thing that links for me aesthetically is the use of the framing and the slowing down from real time to cinematic time to something in between, so that at times in this piece of film he speeds up, he slows down. There's a kind of almost freeze framing, and then it goes again, and it.
Well, I wanted to use the kind of the tricks from music video. I know it doesn't look like a fancy MTV music video,
well,
but
yeah.
the tricks.
There's no drum beat.
That you just make him dance fast, and then you slow down the image, and then his motions will fit to the music in real time. Yeah. Then the relationship is rarely between two men in a music video. Also, so maybe using something that looks like something that's recognizable, but then there's something that is not what you would expect, and that's something that I then kept working with as I made the work more cinematic, and using cinematographer and audio engineer and have the apparatus of filmmaking, but then changing the content, or keep twisting what you would expect in a film by using the science of cinema, but then keep breaking it by, build up an expectation and breaking it with a new expectation that then will break it again. So it never really comes anywhere, but you will start maybe think about what you're watching.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect lead into this notion of the next clip that we wanted to show, Sirens of Chrome from 2010, in which this is a further development technologically, and you just talked about this use of cinema and the cinematographer and location. Again, the location is very specific. Do you want to comment on that before we see the film?
Yeah, again, it's not really painted out where it is, but it could be, it couldn't be that many cities, but it could be a few American cities. I started with this, well, might as well, if you have to talk about it, might as well. It's shot in Detroit, and I didn't know that I was going to shoot in Detroit, but then I had a show at what's it called, MoCAT in Detroit, with older works, and so I was going there, and then a friend of mine is teaching at Cranbrook, so I was going a lot of times to Detroit, and then got very fascinated about this shrinking city, which is very surreal to walk around in or drive.
And the historic context of it being Motor City and automobiles and this construct of the film, in which.
Well, the first thing, then my friend showed me different locations, and I found this one place downtown, and then kind of started from there. It's like an old cinema turned parking structure, and then I just built from there. I wanted the place itself also to perform not only the characters, but then it's a cinema, and then I started from there, and then it felt obvious that it should be African American characters, because I think 80% that lives downtown are African American, and then kept thinking about the African American spectator, and I was then thinking about the African American female spectator, because that's someone that I feel like you never really, or at least who do you identify with as a black female when you watch mainstream film,
right?
Except for
Oprah. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but there's
why don't we show this clip so that people are curious now about this? But that notion of who do you set up to be the character of empathy inside of it? How do you understand the film through the context of a character who is not you and not your projected normative audience is a very interesting one. Shall we show now the Sirens of Chrome?
And it's just a clip.
It's just a clip, of course.
And bad resolution, sorry. cliffhanger. Yeah.
Okay. What I find visually very interesting about this work and subsequent work is the use of reflection, of the use of a scrimming and a screening, shooting through the car window, shooting into the interior, shooting from the interior, exterior, the way that there is a kind of almost a drag of color and distortion that happens that further clouds the specificity of the action, the shift in the film clip we showed between what we'd been experiencing to that moment when you see the two cars and you see the space very clearly. And it stops for a moment as if you were to absorb something intentionally that you've set up for us. And I'm wondering if you'd like to sort of talk about how that framing and recording device of what role does it play for you in making the work? It's also present in This Nameless Spectacle, shooting through the window, inside the room, outside the room.
First of all, I wanted to use the windshield as kind of a reference to the CinemaScope aspect ratio, which is like something like that, like a windshield. And so a lot of the shots, and also the beginning of the clip we saw, is like way too long a take, which is never kind of, it's just, we just see what they see and follow. And then I wanted to reveal this space through the reflections of the car and use that. That's why it's a black car also, because then you see more reflections. So of course that's just like a practical choice. And then as the film or this kind of performative moment expands, the car starts to turn, or is it the cinema that moves? It's hard to tell, but that's kind of how you can make the movements and make everything perform. And I wanted to make, I mean, all the elements are performers in a way.
The building, the car, the participants, the characters.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Where were they going?
And why would it matter?
We will never know. Oh, but if you saw the beginning, it's even longer. It's 5-10 minutes.
Yeah,
but you will never know. I mean, they were going there. I mean, that's what I'm interested in, because I mean, when I work, what's that? Well, the question is if they hit her or not. I mean, for me, doing film is maybe the opposite of mainstream film, where you want to know everything once you've seen it, and you sit back, and everyone in the audience knows what happened, and it's like this. You're confused in the beginning, and then the end. Everyone will sit back and I got it, and you'll even test the films on audience to make sure that everyone gets it, and if too many people didn't get it, then you will change the ending. I'm not interested in that, because you have this big industry that just does that to make money. And so, I mean, the opposite. I want you to think you know what you're watching, and then once you leave the film, you are confused and actually have no clue where they were going.
It strikes me that it is part of the art construct. A painting gives you a series of, whether it's objects or colors or shapes, and it sets it up, and it is a fixed piece. But you know, as you enter it visually, as you experience it, as you exit, as you remember it, every time it's changing. And the film functions that way because it's not telling a story, but it acknowledges the narrative convention without participating. As if, you know, we want a certain kind of series of sensual and visual experiences, like staying too long in the empty streets of Detroit, about spinning higher than that across, you know, as you go up the 5 stories of the parking structure. There's a notion about duration and movement that is part of the building up of the imaginative field on which the viewer finds themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to expand those moments and make it too long. And also this film, it's if it's an impact, if she lets herself roll, it turns in, it's I don't even know. So the idea is that if it is an impact, but then expanding it, and then it turns into something else, and then it goes on for 5 minutes, and it's just everything becomes a performance, and it makes the characters who are inside the car change emotionally towards each other. So that's kind of what slowly happens, but it's kind of very subtle. It's not really that clear.
Yeah, because this is but a section inside of the longer section, and it like the gesture of one woman leaning forward to touch the car seat, and then the shoulder of the driver, and the driver slowly holding the hand for a second. It implies an emotional connectivity that, you know, their independence had not given you before, and as the film evolves, that change goes around the whole car.
Yeah, I mean, I played on the whole cliche from cinema on the black female, which is very often portrayed as loud, ghetto, and very rarely kind of emotional connected. So that was what I was interested in. But then, as a beginning, maybe building up and playing with that expectation or that cliche, and then as slowly as the film progresses, there's a change, and these women are getting some kind of into some emotional relationship.
Well, you know, it's as in the first series of films with the men, it is looking at a social convention and twisting it and tweaking it, looking through it and past it somehow to find a visual and emotional place to be. There are in both of the clips a certain kind of melancholy that commentators have written about your work, a kind of a detachment and a kind of gravity. You don't often do comedies, it turns out.
No, I don't know. So the first one was pretty funny. No.
Oh, the first one, well, yeah, if it weren't slightly poignant, but perhaps that's a chronological or an age-related response to the film that we would differ on, of course. I think there's an interesting thing that happens also in this film that's very specific about the way you sculpt time. All films are time-based, and they set up, in Hollywood, they set up a sequence of start, middle, action, finish. You know, but you tend to play with time and with the markers of time, where an activity can take a very long time, it can be frozen, it can be set, speeded up or slowed down. And that layering of those images as they happen changes and plays with the social conventions that you are also curious about, I think. Could you talk a little bit about time as a time in relationship to the filmmaking in your work?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously there's no talking, and everything is about gestures and the unset in a way, and I do like to dwell with one action if it's driving and no one gets anywhere. It's just because then I think that's what you can do in a art context. You can kind of dwell with these kind of things that then maybe there's space for your own thoughts, because if everything is constantly cutting into the next because you're afraid people will be bored, then there's no time for reflecting. If you just see someone driving for 5 minutes, I mean, either you leave or you start to think about something. So that's what I hope, and I think art is allowed to be just a little bit boring. It's okay.
Well, yeah, I think art often is boring, but I think you're right. That
Because everything has to entertain, and I think that's the privilege of art, that it doesn't have to entertain.
That's right.
So
it has to do something else, something bigger. Why don't we look at the first segment of This Nameless Spectacle, which the title comes from William Carlos Williams' poem. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting fact, but it reflects the way you approach over-researching, overthinking, and then distilling and losing. It's an interesting process. Why don't we run this first section of the work that is currently on view in the Schnitzer Sculpture Court.
But here it's stacked, so it's kind of not right.
It will not, you get the privilege of seeing the two images simultaneously, which you do not get in the actual installation. Exactly, sort of. Time.
Kind of.
I really like how big that looks.
Yeah.
This first section of this nameless spectacle is really, for me, very Arcadian. It's as if the sublime of nature is manifested itself in this place in Paris, the Parc de Butte-Chaumont, which is, of course, an artificial construct of nature. It was the starting point for you, yes, the park and its Arcadian order.
Yeah, well, I wanted to kind of expand the image instead of doing one channel that has this cinematic feeling. I wanted to try and take it further and then do a piece that in a way played on these dioramic effects pre-cinema where you'd have big scrolls of painting on both sides and you were kind of being sandwiched between them, having the feeling of being in motion, traveling through space. And therefore I was looking for a place that was also 19th century, and then this place in Paris was very interesting to me because it was built at the same time as Haussmann built those, restructured all of Paris with big boulevards, and then they also started to build these cultivated parks for people's leisure time, and where you had constructed this built-in narrative like you have in lots of parks, where it opens, it closes, you see different views of the landscape, but it's all like artificially created for you to have this kind of haptic experience in nature.
Yes.
Yeah, it's more almost like an inner traveling also as you travel, and it's gonna cause these emotions as you
move through the space. And you know, it has that quality. Seeing it in this way on a split screen and then experiencing it upstairs, on the split screen you're much more conscious of how things are passing by. When you're upstairs, your attention keeps getting drawn to the sense of the movement, and you are surrounded in a way, in a way that you're not in cinema. And I think that is important to remember, that you observe motion in a cinema, and it's there and it's directional. Whereas in this work, the activity and the action that's moving past you can be sympathetic or contradictory.
Yeah, but it's also the same reason why it's a wheelchair-bound woman, is because I wanted to also work with the idea of the spectator, and it's
in the chair.
The immobility or the mobility at the same time, and no matter what, she kind of stays in the same place, and even play on the idea of the cinema spectator as being immobile somehow. By sitting, you sit in a chair, you are only head, you don't move your body in relation to what you see on the screen. And this piece was all about, you have to choose which side. You can only watch, I mean, you can kind of see both, but you don't really watch it if you look straight ahead. So you have to kind of choose which side to look at. And once you have two characters, you will miss half of the film, because you have to look, and everything that happens is in that in-between space where, if they look at each other, meaning they look in the camera, you're kind of caught in the middle of this mise en scène of these two characters. So in a way to include the spectator and disable the spectator at the same time, or playing on the whole notion of cinema.
Yeah, and it does that very thing. It engages you, and suddenly you're part of it, but you are disabled because you are handicapped by the construct of the presentation, the way the film. I love the Arcadian part where you are watching her, and then you are her watching the scenery, and the kind of overhead, which is experienced only kind of in that kind of fullness when you're seated and moving, like a convertible car, but you're not. You're somehow moving through this space. The film evolves. There is a kind of, because it is a journey in the first part to an action. It sets you up in two different moods. Actually, there are three. I think this is segmented. The Arcadian experience of nature as a force contained and prescribed by the architect who designed the park, and then an action, an introduction of character, and then an event, and then a withdrawal. It's cycled in an interesting way with nature, because the incident is measured by ostensibly the passage of the sun. And so, like lives from dawn to dusk, film from day to night, it sets up another structure inside. Is it worth seeing the second one now? Or
Sure.
yeah, why don't we see the second section quickly, because we want to get to the performance. This underlines something that I think is fascinating. You choose a place because of what it appears to be and what its history is. You ask architecture and place to play an active part in your films. Your characters, your characters inside the film, they are as found in a way, aren't they? They come in their own clothes.
Mm-hmm.
The apartment.
Yeah, nothing is changed. Everything is as, because it adds, and it's more real than anything I could come up with. So I mean that adds for me and kind of suggests the story, if we can call it a story. So the apartment, for instance, was just by chance that a woman, I was walking around taking photos down between the towers, and this woman stops me and asks what I'm doing, and then says, "Oh, we're looking for locations," and it turns out she lives there, and she's more or less the same age as Marie, who is in the film, and so she offered that we could use her place, and so that's just nothing is touched, and it's in that building. So
the apartment was as found. A woman of a certain age, as Marie France is a person of a certain age.
Yeah, and Marie-France is probably not so many noticed this, but she is actually transsexual, and that was something that I used for myself. It's not really a point, but I used it for me to build up the story and having this mise en scène of her in the park and this kind of what is nature, what is culture, and then also a man changing her or his body was something that I found interesting in this kind of in relation to this culture-related nature. So that was a character that is well known in Paris, not outside, I think, but the towers or the place. Yeah, I don't like to add or take things away, only if things are in the way. But I like to, and of course you can focus on things and kind of make it more obvious. But
well, and it serves a very important function because of the kind of stasis and predictable rhythm of the apartment and the unpredictability of the actor. The relationship of those three modernist towers, some planner's design for the future that is, 20 years old and come back.
The funny thing was that the woman that lived in that place, which is probably looked like that since the 60s, she said that her building is not ghetto, but then she pointed on the one across, which is totally a mirror of her building. That's a ghetto, and I mean, it's just, it's hard to believe, but
it's that intersection between reality and imagination, what we choose to believe and what we know, and those things that diverge. It is again the sense of the move from single handheld to multi-channel to multi-screen, and it sets up a series of leaps for the viewer that is not Hollywood, that is not traditional cinema. We make the assumption that they are interacting. We make the assumption that there's cause and effect, and because of the situation you've set up on the camera, the one character, they never appear together, but they can appear simultaneously on the two screens.
Yeah, they're never in the same film. It's only, the spectator, if they connect it like that, that makes that connection. As they look in the camera, it will seem like they're looking on the other character on the other screen, looking the same. So it was, that's all, of course, just artificial. But I like to work with these kind of open moments in terms of build-up expectation. It's something that seems familiar, and you might have seen something similar in some film, and then, like when we didn't see that, but when she rolls into her apartment, as soon as the door's closed, she just gets up and walks around, and it's not a problem. She didn't need it, or at least she doesn't need it, the wheelchair when she is at home. And so that kind of way, constantly breaking these kind of...
What you see and assume with what happens and how appearances mirror logic, but they're a smoke screen.
I'm not saying that doesn't happen in feature films. Of course, it's also all about expectations, but it's within a certain kind of limits, because you don't want people to be too confused with, let's say, characters' sexual orientation or things like that. Has to be clear, and I like it to be unclear, so you become a little bit insecure about both relationships and also the different kind of things. So you can't really put it in the box. So I try to have it out there where it's kind of...
Well, I think it's very successful. This work, because of the way it's written about, because of the description we make of it, makes it a linear narrative. But as you experience it, as you reconstruct it in memory, you find yourself always at a loss to explain something because you will have missed it on one screen, and so it has holes, and it has those
I don't know
lacuna
if it's
become
holes because you
space.
choose to edit the film as you want. Of course, you are maybe aware that you miss some, but I think that's part of the point, and you can always come back.
And it certainly leads to that notion of the work that you did for the Danish Pavilion in the Venice Biennale last year, which was a 5-screen, architecturally shaped and manipulated space. The entire pavilion became both the ground for what you created and then the housing for the films that were shot.
Yeah, it's a bit different with that one because that becomes even less cinematic maybe, and it's more like a total experience, total installation with film works. It's always strange to be invited to represent a country, and especially in Venice, where you have these pavilions that stands empty the rest of the time, and then every second year or every year when there's the architect biennial, then there's the art biennial the other year. But then you just have this structure standing, representing a country in another country, and that was kind of my starting point. And on top of that, the Danish Pavilion are 2 different architectural styles in this weird mismatch put together. One is neoclassical, and later in the 60s, this modernist annex was kind of added. So it looks really strange, like a private villa, but then on the back side, the old entrance has like columns and like a pompous entrance that is now the exit. So it's very strange. And so first I thought what to do. I should shut down half of the place and then only use one room. And then it just seemed meaningless when we had a chance to use a whole building. So then I decided had to use every single room. I mean, everything. And then I walled it around with these
cement blocks.
Yeah, cement blocks, which also, and then everything was, you kind of walked through every single room guided by these blocks, and then you exited through the tool shed. And it gave the weird feeling of dislocation, which also had a connection to the place I actually filmed, which was in a replica city of Paris in China. So it was, you have these big Haussmann boulevards, and you have Eiffel Tower, and then suddenly it's just excavation. But in the middle of nowhere, there's this city of Paris, which is not like Las Vegas. It's more like it's real estate speculation. It's just what to build next, because they have to come up with something.
Yeah, you need something to sell the tower.
So I wanted to film it there, and then to again, it wasn't like a geopolitical point necessarily. It's just one layer maybe that this is going on, that China is now taking what they want, not as an homage to Western or European culture, but just because now they're in the power of they can do that. It's like the opposite of what happens when, Britain or Holland or whoever was invading China and importing whatever they wanted to China. Now they just take what they want. It's a different power game. And so that was one part, but it's not playing too much of that on that. I wanted to shoot it as what it claims to be. So decided to shoot it as if it was Paris in this kind of old black and white Truffaut style. And then with French actors. But then again, not to make it too obvious, then it was also French actors of African descent. So everything is kind of very hard to
pin down, to locate, to place. And the experience was interesting because the dislocation of your expectation as you move through the rooms by your intrusions, your deviations from the expected architectural progressions, and then the bamboo, the water, the way the things that, should we watch the first or second?
Yeah, unfortunately we don't have images from the installation, so it's only the film parts, but the films were 5 different films in loops, so when you walk through the building, you couldn't watch them all at the same time.
No.
So like here, where you cut by turning your head, There you actually have to move from one space to the other to cut the movie. So you had to move physically to kind of connect the films. But as everything was loops, no one will ever see the same film.
In the same sequence twice, yes.
No, so yeah. But
Should-
so what we'll show is just one clip of one screen, and then we can afterwards
Quickly
watch.
see that.
Well, it's going to be very confusing because it's just 5 screens on top of each other. But we can maybe do that.
Well, yeah, because I think it shows us this next kind of almost bricolage quality that happens between these returning to a loop as a notion of how film is structured, where you take a section and it repeats itself continuously against another one that's grinding, so that it's like certain kind of modern music. You hear different melodic and bass and staccato lines against each other and their changing relationship as a soundscape.
But also
this
the
becomes
sounds
an
are,
image.
because it's here. It's actually normally I wouldn't want videos to merge, and you can hear the sounds. But here's the whole point: is that you hear the sounds from all the films, and they merge together to be like one soundtrack for all 5 different rooms.
Because it's a composite of all of them.
Yeah, it was built on. I mean, the soundscape is partly of all these built-in beer bottles in the walls. That's something that I created, but which comes from an old Danish bricklayer tradition, where you would put in a beer bottle in the construction if you were mistreated by the developer, and just leave like a thank you for nothing, because then they will make the building sound haunted forever. I mean, because they will place it really high and you can really find out where it was. So that's
Yeah, so there'll be this whistling sound somewhere.
yeah, it's like haunted inside the building. So we just placed hundreds and hundreds of, I mean, fake of course, but on the outside.
Well, all right, why don't we run this clip and see this, because we're going to run out of time.
Do you want to show 5 screens?
Yeah, why don't we show the 5 screens quickly and then we'll comment and wrap up. But
Just a minute.
yeah, we'll show a minute of it. And the
But you couldn't really watch it like this. This is just for, yeah.
Yeah. So in the pavilion, these 5 screens would be split apart. You would hear them, you would see parts of them, but not any of them all together. It was a powerful experience to be, you entered back through a back door off the garden and then wound your way through and then out through the storage room. It was, many people missed it, I think, because there was a confusion about what happened to the Danes. And yet, when you...
Well, it was walled in and it looked like very, yeah, I mean...
One of those perpetual remodel jobs.
It was, yeah, it seemed like that was it, or you couldn't find your way, but that actually was, the walls were kind of, yeah, exclusive somewhere, but that also became your guide, what's led you through like a maze, and so once you found the entrance, the walls would be your friend, but as the first, it looked very hostile.
Yeah.
It was, so, yeah.
And then each of the images were they all the same size? My memory is they were different scale, depending on the spaces, not unlike this.
Yeah, and then so the one in the bottom was very big. I don't know, maybe 50 feet wide, and then yeah.
So they had this relative proportion,
so
as you
black and white,
experienced.
and then you had these bamboo boxes also made out of concrete, and then bamboo was growing, and then you had these grow lights
with that color,
which is purple. I don't know why, but it's purple, and that just kind of reflected up onto the image, which has this nice connecting feeling between the sculptural elements and the image, which was kind of at first not intentional, but then it kind of so happened in a way that worked out in a cool way, I think.
So that the narrative codes that are built into it are ones that are shaped by the architecture, the places, the transit, the sense of time as it loops continuously inside this structure. But there is, unlike this nameless spectacle, no way for you to kind of build a narrative out of it.
Well, I wanted to use I mean, for me there is, but of course I can't control it when I decide to make a stupid idea like that, that it's so open. But in one of the films, you have there's 3 characters, and they're kind of all connecting through the walls by listening to the sounds of these bottles, which becomes the mediator somehow connecting the 3 men through this cardboard kind of city, but then insisting that there is some kind of poetry. I don't know if you can, if it's...
No, I found it very poetic.
But insisting that there is something within these buildings that kind of could connect people, because it's very empty. It's only like a third of the city that is occupied, and the rest is just standing there. And I think it's meant to be for 100,000 people out.
At the end of the process.
Yeah, but there's no trains going there, so it's out. It's 2 hours from Shanghai, but eventually they say there will be a train station where the Eiffel Tower is, and then they're going to move the Eiffel Tower to the other end.
Well, you know, the Eiffel Tower is a mobile construct.
They are not sensitive about it. Yeah, no, it's kind of, they're kind of very, it's just a thing. Yeah.
It's a useful tool for focusing land development. Croissant shops, other things that need it. It was it opened the door both from the past work to the future work. You've just opened a 10-year survey at the Des Moines Art Center and received the Ecclesburg Medal from Queen Margaret of Denmark, the oldest art prize, I think, of its kind, 1750, for your work and for the Danish Pavilion.
Oh, thanks. You couldn't have it.
It is worth going to see again the Nameless Spectacle on view through May, to rethink your relationship to what you see and how you feel, subverted and shaped by Jesper Jost. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being part of this.
No, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
We are at 3:20. The Contemporary Art Council is sponsoring a reception in the Miller Room in the building next door, the Mark Building. For those of you who'd like to join Mr. Jost and the Contemporary Art Council, we invite you to do so. Thank you for coming today, and we hope to see you on May 17th.
Thank you.